She had always been careful to live her life quietly, blending into the background as if that was the safest way to exist. The small apartment she rented was filled with the soft sounds of her piano, the only place where she felt fully alive. Each day, she would sit at the worn keys, letting the music flow through her fingers as she lost herself in melodies that no one else would hear. She never imagined that one evening would change everything. It started with a simple envelope that arrived at her door, an invitation that seemed almost too grand to be meant for her. The card was thick, the print elegant, and the words inside shimmered with an almost unreal formality. She read it over and over, hardly daring to believe it was for her. An invitation to a party hosted by one of the city's most well-known millionaires. She sat at her piano, envelope in hand, heart racing. She had never attended anything like this before. She barely even knew anyone in the city. Yet here was an invitation that promised grandeur and splendor. She held it against her chest and let out a small, nervous laugh. Why would they invite her? Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe they had confused her with someone else. The thought of stepping into a world so far removed from her own was thrilling and terrifying at the same time. She couldn't deny the pull of curiosity, the desire to see what it would feel like to be somewhere so different from her quiet life. For days, she imagined every detail. What would the rooms look like? How would the people behave? Would they even notice her? Or would she fade into the walls, unnoticed as always? She pictured herself walking through vast halls filled with sparkling lights and laughter, the air thick with perfume and the quiet clinking of glasses. She imagined the millionaire, a figure she had only heard of in passing, greeting guests with a calm and powerful presence that made everyone feel slightly smaller in comparison. On the evening of the party, she dressed carefully, choosing an outfit that was elegant but not flashy. She didn't want to stand out in a bad way, but she also didn't want to feel invisible. She studied herself in the mirror, adjusting her hair and smoothing the fabric of her dress. Every detail mattered to her, yet the anxiety in her chest remained. She had never been in such a crowd before, and the thought of being surrounded by strangers was both exciting and daunting. As she stepped into the taxi that would take her to the party, she felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. The city lights blurred past the window, mirroring the whirlwind of thoughts in her mind. She wondered if she would be able to find the courage to speak to anyone, to introduce herself, to take part in a world that seemed so far from her own. But underneath it all, there was a quiet determination. She had her music with her, the one thing that could anchor her when everything else felt overwhelming. The party was held in a grand mansion that seemed to glow in the evening light. The steps leading up to the entrance were lined with lights that twinkled like stars, and the doors opened to reveal a hall filled with laughter, conversation, and the soft hum of background music. She paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath, and stepped inside. The scent of flowers and fine food filled her senses, and she felt her heart skip a beat. This world was dazzling, and she felt like a small, fragile figure stepping into a painting where everything was too perfect. Guests moved around her, elegant in their attire, talking and laughing with the ease of people used to such settings. She felt the weight of their gazes, subtle but present, and she tried to shrink into herself, wishing she could disappear. But as she walked further into the room, something caught her eye. A piano sitting quietly in a corner, polished and waiting. It seemed almost like it had been placed there for her alone. Her heart leapt. It was familiar and comforting. A small piece of the world she knew inside this dazzling, strange place. She approached it slowly, fingers brushing over the keys as if greeting an old friend. She could hear the faint echo of the room around her, the distant chatter and laughter softening as she sat down. Her hands hovered over the keys, uncertain at first, then began to play a soft, gentle melody. The sound filled the room in a way that felt almost magical, a fragile voice cutting through the hum of the party. She closed her eyes and let the music guide her, forgetting the world outside the piano's reach. Some guests began to notice, turning their heads toward the melody. Conversations faltered as people realized that someone was playing with a depth and emotion that demanded attention. The millionaire, standing a few steps away, paused mid-conversation, listening. He was curious, intrigued by the delicate yet confident touch on the piano. There was something in the music that spoke to him, something unexpected and real in the midst of the glitz. Her hands moved with growing confidence, each note carrying a story she had never told anyone. The music swelled slightly, filling the room with emotion that was impossible to ignore. She felt her own fears slipping away with every measure, replaced by a quiet joy she had never experienced in a public space. For the first time, she felt seen, not by words but by the recognition of her talent, and her heart poured out through the piano. The crowd's attention shifted slowly but surely. People stopped in their tracks, drawn toward the corner where she played. The chatter quieted to a murmur, the party seeming to pause as her melody flowed through the room. Eyes turned, mouths slightly open, hearts touched by something unexpected. She could feel the energy in the room changing, a current of surprise and admiration that made her own heartbeat quicken. She had never played for an audience like this, and yet she felt an unspoken connection to everyone listening. Her mind raced, aware that this moment could vanish as quickly as it had appeared. She had to make it count. She played with all the emotion she had kept hidden, letting the music speak for her when words could not. Each chord was a piece of her story, each note a reflection of her dreams and doubts. She was no longer just a quiet figure in the crowd. She had become the center of attention without even realizing it, carried by the power of her own talent. The millionaire stepped closer, genuinely impressed. His presence was commanding but not intimidating. It carried respect and appreciation. He watched as she played, noting the skill, passion, and authenticity in her performance. For a moment, the world seemed to shrink, and it was just her and the piano, connected to everyone around them through something unspoken yet profound. As she finished the piece, a hush fell over the room. The last note lingered in the air, leaving a fragile silence that spoke louder than applause ever could. She opened her eyes, blinking at the crowd, unsure of what to expect. People were staring, some in awe, some smiling, some whispering to each other. The millionaire nodded slightly, a small smile forming on his lips. Her heart swelled with a mix of relief and pride. For the first time, she realized that her quiet life had prepared her for this moment. The hours spent alone at her piano had honed a skill that could move people, that could bridge worlds she had never imagined entering. The fear that had filled her chest moments ago was replaced with a thrilling awareness. She had the power to captivate, to leave a mark without saying a word. The party continued around her, but she no longer felt invisible. Her music had spoken for her, opening doors to a world that had seemed unreachable. She remained at the piano, letting the melody fade slowly, content to simply exist in the moment, knowing that the night had already given her something far more valuable than recognition. It had given her the courage to be seen. The night was just beginning, but she already felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The applause for her music had faded, replaced by the usual hum of conversation and laughter. Yet something inside her had changed. She had played, and people had noticed, but the thought of continuing in such a world made her heart race with doubt. She wasn't sure if she belonged here, or if her music could truly be appreciated beyond this single performance. Guests moved around her, engaging in small talk and laughter that seemed effortless, as if the night had been designed for them alone. She tried to follow along, nodding politely when people spoke to her, but she felt like an outsider watching a play from the back row. Their words, their jokes, even their smiles felt distant. She longed for the quiet intimacy of her piano, where every note was her own and nobody judged or whispered. Yet, she couldn't help but glance at the crowd, noting the subtle shifts in attention whenever someone passed near the piano. The millionaire was a constant presence in the background, moving from group to group with a natural ease that drew people in. He spoke with confidence, but there was a spark of curiosity in his eyes whenever he looked her way. It made her nervous, knowing that someone so influential was watching her, but it also filled her with a quiet determination. She realized she could not remain invisible forever. She had talent, and tonight might be her chance to let it shine again. She wandered through the crowd, trying to feel at ease, Yet every corner of the grand hall reminded her of her small life outside. The chandeliers above glittered like captured stars, and the walls were lined with art she could never afford to own. It was beautiful, overwhelming, and for a moment, she wished she could disappear. But her eyes kept returning to the piano, calling her like an old friend who understood her in ways the world never had. Finally, she made her way back to it, brushing her fingers lightly over the keys as if testing the air. No one was near, yet she felt a wave of nervous anticipation. The room was buzzing with activity, but she could feel the pull of the piano, the silent promise that it could carry her once again. She hesitated, heart beating fast, then allowed herself to sit and play a few tentative notes. The sound was soft at first, almost hesitant, but it grew steadily as she immersed herself. The melody was different this time, a reflection of the curiosity and doubt that had followed her through the crowd. It was playful in parts, tender in others, and it carried the subtle weight of longing. Guests passing by paused once again, their conversations faltering as the music drew them in. The millionaire, finishing a conversation, stopped to listen, standing just beyond the circle of light that illuminated her hands on the keys. His expression was one of genuine interest, a rare mixture of surprise and admiration. She noticed how the room changed when she played. People turned, faces softening, eyes widening slightly at the unexpected beauty that flowed from someone so unassuming. A few guests whispered to each other, trying to name the source of the talent, but most were simply captivated. The piano allowed her to speak without words, to communicate something profound that no polite conversation could achieve. The fear that had gripped her earlier began to melt away. She was no longer merely a guest, standing awkwardly among strangers. She was part of something bigger, a presence that could shape the room with her music. Every chord she played felt like a small rebellion against the fear that had always held her back. Every note a quiet assertion that she had value, that her talent mattered, even here. The millionaire moved a little closer, intrigued by the shifts in her melody and the emotion it carried. He observed her carefully, noting the precision of her fingers, the passion that came through even in the smallest gestures. There was an authenticity to her playing that could not be taught, something raw and real that left him momentarily speechless. The guests around her were caught in the same spell, unaware of the passage of time as the music flowed. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she did not have to retreat to her small apartment, one where her talent could be seen and appreciated every day. The thought was both thrilling and frightening. She had worked in silence for so long that the idea of recognition felt almost unreal. Yet here it was, offered without expectation, simply because she had dared to play. Her music shifted subtly, incorporating a hint of improvisation that mirrored her emotions. There were notes of joy, lines of curiosity, and undercurrents of fear, all woven together seamlessly. She noticed that the whispers around her had grown quieter, that more guests had stopped to listen. Some were smiling, some were frowning in concentration, but all were affected. The power of her music was undeniable, and she could feel the room responding to her. A young guest approached, politely asking if she had formal training, and she shook her head, smiling softly. She had learned by listening, by practicing in the quiet of her apartment, by letting the piano become an extension of her own thoughts and feelings. The guest nodded in amazement, unable to hide their surprise at someone with such depth of skill and emotion. She realized that her music was speaking louder than words ever could, that her story was being told in the rise and fall of each melody. The millionaire cleared his throat softly, drawing her attention without startling her. He stepped closer, offering a nod of approval and a faint smile that carried both encouragement and admiration. It was not just polite recognition. It was a moment of genuine respect. She felt a rush of pride, tempered by humility, realizing that her music had earned a place in a room filled with people she had once assumed were unreachable. As the evening progressed, she continued to play in intervals, each performance drawing more attention and deepening her confidence. The room had become a living thing around her, responding to the shifts in her music, bending to the rhythm of her imagination. She was no longer a passive observer of the world of wealth and elegance. She was an active participant, shaping the atmosphere with her talent. Between performances, she allowed herself to mingle briefly, answering polite questions about her music and life. The conversations felt different now, less daunting, as people treated her with genuine interest rather than polite curiosity. The millionaire occasionally returned to observe, watching the way she carried herself, the subtle confidence she had begun to display. He spoke to a few guests about her, recommending that they listen, and she felt a warm sense of validation wash over her. Despite the grandeur of the surroundings, she remained grounded, remembering the hours of practice, the moments of solitude, the quiet lessons learned in her apartment. The contrast between her humble beginnings and the luxurious environment was striking, yet it made her achievements feel even more significant. She was not here because of luck or chance. She was here because of talent, perseverance, and a willingness to step into the unknown. As the night drew on, she realized that she had found a balance. She could be herself, quiet and thoughtful, and yet still command attention through the piano. The music had created a bridge between her world and this new one, allowing her to exist authentically without compromise. She felt a sense of belonging she had never experienced before, not through words or social status, but through the undeniable language of her own skill. She played her final piece of the evening with a gentle resolve, each note carrying the essence of her journey from doubt to recognition. The room responded instinctively, the guests leaning in, captivated by the depth of feeling she conveyed. The millionaire, standing nearby, allowed a small, approving smile to show, acknowledging the rare and authentic talent before him. The music ended, leaving a delicate silence that lingered just long enough to make its impact unforgettable. The applause was warm, heartfelt, and lasting, yet it felt secondary to the quiet satisfaction she carried within herself. She had entered the party as a stranger, unsure and hesitant, but she was leaving, even temporarily, with a sense of achievement and newfound confidence. The night had proven to her that courage, authenticity, and talent could open doors, even in places that once felt inaccessible. As she stepped away from the piano, she allowed herself a small, private smile. The party continued around her, but she no longer felt like an outsider. She had found her voice, and it had been heard. The music had given her more than attention. It had given her recognition, respect, and the thrilling realization that her life could include moments of wonder she had never imagined. The evening had grown darker, but the mansion was alive with energy. Crystal lights reflected off the walls and floors, creating patterns that danced along with the music of soft conversations and laughter. She returned to the piano once more, drawn by its silent promise that only it could understand her, that only it could speak for her in a way no words ever could. Her hands hovered above the keys, her heart still beating with excitement and a little fear. She wasn't sure why she had been invited in the first place. The world she had stepped into felt distant and luxurious, like a dream she had no right to enter. Yet, with each step toward the piano, she reminded herself that this night was her moment. Her music had already caught attention earlier, and she could feel the curiosity of the crowd, faintly buzzing around her like electricity. She took a deep breath and let her fingers find the keys. The melody began softly, almost like a whisper. She closed her eyes and let her emotions guide her, allowing her past doubts, fears, and hopes to flow through her fingertips. Every note seemed to carry a piece of her life, her struggles, and her quiet dreams. She was not merely playing music. She was telling a story that everyone in the room could feel, even if they did not know the words. Some guests paused near the piano, captivated by the sound. Others, engrossed in their conversations moments before, slowly turned to listen. Even the millionaire, who had been speaking with a few associates, stopped and leaned slightly forward. There was something unusual in her playing, something raw and unpolished in a way that made it all the more real. It drew people closer, gently yet irresistibly. Her confidence had grown since her first performance of the night. She felt free now, liberated by the way her music could command attention without a single spoken word. Her melodies wove through the air, soft at times, urgent at others, touching everyone who listened. Some faces showed surprise, some curiosity, and some were moved almost to tears. She did not need them to understand the technical perfection. The emotion itself was enough. The room seemed to quiet gradually, as if the music had a gravity of its own. Conversations faded, and even the clinking of glasses softened, creating a space where she and her piano became the center of attention. The more she played, the less she felt nervous. It was as though the piano had become a friend, a guide through this strange and glittering world. Her mind cleared of fear, replaced by the pleasure of connecting with others through her music. The millionaire approached, walking slowly as he watched her hands. He did not speak, not needing to. Her music was already making an impression, and he was genuinely intrigued. There was a rare quality in her playing, a mix of vulnerability and strength that could not be taught or imitated. She was revealing a side of herself that most people never got to see, and it was affecting everyone around her. She noticed how the audience reacted, their eyes fixed on her, leaning slightly forward, drawn to the nuances in the melody. Some whispered softly to each other, sharing their astonishment without disturbing the quiet magic she had created. The room felt intimate, despite its size and grandeur, as though her music had wrapped everyone in a shared moment of wonder. Encouraged, she began to add a subtle improvisation, her fingers dancing lightly over the keys in ways she had never dared before. Each variation was delicate but full of expression, a conversation between her emotions and the piano. The guests were spellbound, and she felt an almost electric connection with the audience. For the first time, she understood that her music had power, not just to entertain, but to move and captivate. Her melodies became bolder, more daring, and the reactions around her shifted. People leaned in more, some holding their breath as they listened. The millionaire's expression changed. His curiosity turned into admiration. He was impressed not only by her skill but by the authenticity and courage behind it. Her playing carried honesty, something that could not be bought or rehearsed, and it resonated in a way that made the grand surroundings feel smaller and more human. She lost herself in the music, each chord a reflection of her journey. She remembered the long nights spent alone in her small apartment, practicing, learning, and dreaming. Every struggle she had faced, every moment of doubt, had led to this instant, where her talent was visible, undeniable, and appreciated. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was her voice, her bridge to a world she had never imagined joining. The room had become still, the energy now focused entirely on her. She noticed a few guests wiping their eyes subtly, touched by the unexpected depth of her music. Even those who were initially indifferent had been drawn in. The piano allowed her to speak in a way that words could not, to communicate honesty and emotion in a language everyone understood. She felt a quiet pride but also a humility, knowing this connection was rare and precious. The millionaire, now standing closer than before, watched intently. He seemed to be analyzing every note, every movement of her hands, understanding the skill and heart required to play with such sincerity. His presence was not intimidating. Instead, it felt validating, as though he was silently acknowledging the courage it took to reveal her inner world to a room full of strangers. She felt a warmth spread through her, a reassurance that her effort had meaning. The music continued, flowing seamlessly from one mood to another, reflecting her inner thoughts. Moments of softness were followed by passages of intensity, moments of hesitation followed by bursts of confidence. The audience was held in suspense, experiencing the ebb and flow of emotion with her. She realized that the power of her music was not only in the notes themselves but in the honesty she put into them. As the piece neared its end, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The guests were silent, fully immersed, some leaning slightly forward, captivated by the story unfolding in sound. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the final notes, aware of the impact she had created. There was a fragile beauty in the pause between notes, a moment suspended in time that felt almost sacred. She let the last chord linger, and the silence that followed spoke louder than any applause could. She opened her eyes slowly, blinking against the lights, and realized the room was still hushed. People were staring, eyes wide, breaths caught in a mix of astonishment and admiration. The millionaire smiled faintly, nodding with genuine approval, and she felt a rush of quiet triumph. Her music had transcended the grandeur of the evening, capturing attention not through wealth or status, but through honesty and talent. As the applause finally began, it was warm and heartfelt, but she barely heard it over the sense of fulfillment swelling inside her. She had faced her doubts, embraced her talent, and connected with people in a way she had never imagined possible. Her music had opened a door, not just to recognition, but to the possibility of a future where she could be seen and appreciated for who she truly was. She stepped back from the piano, her hands tingling from the performance, and allowed herself a quiet smile. The party continued around her, but she no longer felt like a passive observer. She had become part of the evening, her presence and her talent recognized and valued. It was a subtle but powerful shift, one that made her realize that courage and authenticity could carve a space even in worlds that once seemed unattainable. She wandered briefly through the room, letting the applause settle, and noticed the small gestures of admiration around her. Guests were talking softly about her, sharing their wonder and surprise. The millionaire returned to his conversation but with a glint of respect in his eyes that she would not forget. She felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, knowing that her music had created a connection that words could not capture. Sitting at the piano again, she allowed herself a few gentle notes, a private celebration of the night's journey. The melodies were lighter now, playful, reflecting the joy and newfound confidence that had grown within her. She knew that this was just the beginning, that her life and her music held potential she had only glimpsed until now. The evening had given her more than attention. It had given her the knowledge that her talent could open doors, even in worlds she had once thought beyond reach. The music had drawn everyone in, and now the room was held in a quiet anticipation that was almost tangible. She sat at the piano, feeling the weight of the night settle on her shoulders in a way that was both exhilarating and terrifying. She could feel eyes on her, not just noticing her, but truly watching, waiting for something extraordinary. The millionaire, standing slightly back, observed with interest and quiet admiration. This was her moment, and she could feel it pulsing in the air around her. She took a deep breath, letting it out slowly, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first note she played was soft, almost hesitant, yet it carried a kind of honesty that immediately reached the room. Guests shifted, drawn into the sound like moths to a light. Conversations stopped, footsteps paused, and the chatter of the party faded into the background. It was as if her music had created a separate space within the mansion, one that existed solely for the moment she was about to create. The melody grew, becoming richer and more intricate. She allowed herself to play with abandon, expressing emotions she had kept hidden for years. There was a tenderness in her music that hinted at vulnerability, but also a quiet strength that resonated deeply. People in the room could feel it without understanding why, and they were captivated. Even the millionaire, who had seen countless performances in his life, was taken aback by the sheer depth and authenticity of her playing. Her fingers moved over the keys with confidence, each note telling a story that words could never capture. The music became a bridge between her world and the world of the guests, connecting them through emotion rather than conversation. She could see faces softening, eyes widening, and small smiles appearing. The music carried a sense of honesty that was impossible to ignore. It was not just skill on display. It was the essence of her being laid bare for everyone to see. She let the melody shift subtly, adding variations and flourishes that reflected her own feelings in the moment. The music flowed like water, sometimes calm and gentle, other times passionate and urgent. Guests leaned in, unable to resist the pull of her playing. The room had transformed, the grand hall no longer just a place of luxury, but a space where something human and real was unfolding in front of everyone. The millionaire stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her hands. He watched with a growing sense of admiration, recognizing not only the technical skill but also the courage it took to express oneself so openly. Her music was more than performance. It was an invitation into her world. He was silently acknowledging her talent, and his presence, steady and respectful, gave her a boost of confidence that made her play with even more passion. She noticed the reactions of the guests around her. Some were whispering softly, others were simply staring, moved in ways they could not articulate. The music seemed to speak directly to their hearts, bypassing logic and reaching something deeper. She realized that the piano had become a conduit, not just for her feelings, but for a shared human experience that connected everyone in the room. Encouraged, she allowed herself to play more daringly, weaving in emotional crescendos and gentle diminuendos that mirrored the ebb and flow of life itself. The room responded instinctively, each note amplifying the sense of awe. The millionaire, now standing closer, nodded slightly, impressed by the way she commanded attention without demanding it. Her music had a presence that was undeniable, a force that drew everyone in and held them captive as she approached the climax of her piece. Her heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. She could feel the energy of the room, the silent anticipation of the guests, the weight of the moment pressing gently against her. Every note mattered, every pause carried meaning. She played with precision and emotion, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and deeply human. The final notes hung in the air, delicate and resonant, filling the room with a sense of completion that was almost sacred. There was a brief silence, a pause so profound that it seemed to stretch time itself. Guests held their breath, waiting for the spell to break. Then, slowly, the applause began, soft at first, then growing, swelling until the room was alive with genuine admiration. The sound of appreciation was like a warm embrace, acknowledging not just her skill, but her courage and authenticity. She opened her eyes, blinking against the lights, and took in the sight of the guests around her. Their expressions were a mix of amazement and admiration, eyes wide, some glistening with tears, others smiling broadly. The millionaire approached, his expression calm but clearly impressed. He extended a hand in silent acknowledgement, a gesture of respect that spoke volumes. She felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of validation that went beyond words. The music had done more than capture attention. It had transformed the room. What had begun as a grand, impersonal gathering had become intimate, connected through the universal language of emotion. She realized that her playing had touched something deeper in everyone present, a reminder that talent and authenticity could create moments of shared wonder, even in a world dominated by wealth and status. Guests approached her, offering compliments and expressing astonishment at her skill. She accepted them quietly, her heart full, knowing that the words themselves were secondary to the impact her music had made. She had spoken without speaking, shared without explaining, and left an impression that would linger long after the party ended. It was a rare and precious feeling, one that made all the years of practice and solitude worth it. The millionaire lingered, watching her interact with the guests, and then spoke softly, praising her courage and talent. He hinted at opportunities and possibilities, not with the force of obligation but with genuine interest and encouragement. She felt a rush of excitement mixed with humility, realizing that her life might be opening up in ways she had never imagined. Her music had bridged a gap, connecting her to a world that once seemed unreachable. As the night continued, she sat at the piano, allowing herself to play more gently, almost as a gift to those who had gathered around. The room was still alive, buzzing with conversation and laughter, but it now carried a new layer of meaning. People moved through the space differently, with an awareness that something special had occurred, a moment that transcended the ordinary. She felt proud, not in arrogance, but in a quiet, deeply personal satisfaction that came from knowing she had shared her true self. The evening stretched on, and she continued to play intermittently, each piece carrying its own story, its own emotional weight. The guests responded, not merely with polite applause, but with genuine attention and appreciation. She had found a rhythm within the party, a balance between the grandeur of the setting and the intimacy of her music. It was a delicate harmony, and she savored every note. As the final hours of the party approached, she felt a sense of calm and fulfillment. She had faced the uncertainty of the night, embraced her talent, and connected with people in a way that felt both extraordinary and deeply human. The millionaire nodded once more in her direction, a silent acknowledgement that her presence had left a lasting impression. She realized that this night, this moment, would stay with her forever, a reminder of what was possible when courage, authenticity, and passion converged. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the final notes resonate in the space around her. The applause had faded into background noise, replaced by the quiet satisfaction of accomplishment. She had entered the party as an uncertain guest, unsure of her place in the world, and now she was leaving, at least temporarily, with a sense of recognition and connection that was rare and precious. The piano had been her voice, her bridge, and her triumph, and she knew that it would continue to guide her long after the night ended. The party had begun hours ago, yet she felt like she had only just arrived in this world that had once seemed so distant and unreachable. The applause from her performances earlier still lingered in her mind, each echo reinforcing a quiet sense of accomplishment she had never experienced before. She had played with honesty, with passion, and now she could see the effect it had on those around her. The room had transformed from a grand gathering into a shared moment of connection, and she realized she had been the catalyst. Guests approached her with warmth and genuine curiosity, asking questions about her music and complimenting her skill. She responded modestly, her words calm but sincere, letting her actions and music speak louder than explanations. Some were surprised that someone so young and unassuming could possess such talent. Others were clearly moved by the emotional depth of her performances, speaking softly among themselves about how unexpected and extraordinary it had been. She smiled quietly, grateful for their appreciation, but aware that this was just the beginning. The millionaire approached, a calm and thoughtful expression on his face. He spoke kindly, praising her courage and artistry, noting that it was rare to see someone play with such sincerity. He mentioned opportunities for her, invitations to perform for events and audiences she had never imagined reaching. She listened, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. It was more than recognition. It was a validation of years of dedication, solitude, and quiet persistence. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what it would be like to perform for audiences who genuinely valued her music, to step beyond the walls of her small apartment into a world where her talent could flourish. The thought was exhilarating and intimidating, yet it filled her with a sense of possibility she had never allowed herself to feel. She had always played in silence, unsure if anyone would ever notice or care, and now the world seemed suddenly open and full of promise. She returned to the piano, letting her fingers play a few soft notes, not for the applause, but as a way to savor the moment. The room had quieted, and those who remained were listening, not out of obligation but out of genuine interest. Her music was now a gentle conversation, a shared experience that connected her to the people around her. Each chord carried a story of her journey, a testament to persistence and passion. The guests moved closer, some nodding subtly, some smiling, and others quietly reflecting on the emotion she conveyed. The millionaire lingered near the piano, observing the ease and authenticity with which she played. His presence was encouraging rather than imposing, a reminder that recognition did not always need to come with pressure or expectation. She felt a sense of balance, a harmony between her private world of music and the public world of admiration and connection. She allowed herself to play with a renewed sense of freedom, experimenting with gentle variations and improvisations. The music became a dialogue, a way to express gratitude for the moment and the acknowledgement she had received. Guests responded instinctively, drawn in by the honesty of the sound, captivated not just by technical skill but by the depth of feeling she conveyed. The room had become a space of shared emotion, where each person present felt a part of something meaningful. As she continued, she noticed the subtle ways people were affected. Some had tears in their eyes, some were leaning in, captivated by the melody, and others whispered softly to each other, unable to fully articulate their astonishment. She realized that her music had transcended the ordinary boundaries of performance, touching people in a way that words alone could not. The realization brought a sense of humility and awe, a recognition that her talent had the power to connect and inspire. The millionaire spoke again, this time offering a personal suggestion. He encouraged her to consider sharing her music more widely, hinting at opportunities that could help her reach audiences she had never imagined. She listened intently, absorbing every word with a mixture of hope and disbelief. The idea that her quiet, solitary practice could lead to such possibilities was both thrilling and overwhelming. Yet she felt ready, strengthened by the night's experiences and the validation of her talent. She played another piece, slower this time, allowing each note to resonate fully. It was a reflective melody, a moment to process the evening and everything that had happened. The guests who remained were attentive, some leaning against walls, some seated, all listening with a shared sense of respect. Her music had become a bridge, connecting people through emotion, creating a space where everyone felt a part of something larger than themselves. The applause came again, softer than before but heartfelt, acknowledging not just her playing but the presence and authenticity she brought. She felt a warm glow inside, a sense of accomplishment that went beyond recognition. This was a moment of personal triumph, a reminder that her dedication, her courage to play, and her willingness to share herself had created an impact that was real and lasting. The room began to slowly empty, guests moving toward the exit, their conversations filled with reflections on the extraordinary music they had heard. She remained at the piano for a few moments longer, savoring the quiet that followed, letting the notes linger in the air and in her heart. The night had been more than a party. It had been a turning point, a bridge between her private world and a wider audience that could appreciate her talent. She reflected on her journey, the years of practice, the moments of doubt, and the quiet determination that had brought her here. She realized that her music was more than a skill. It was a part of her identity, a way to communicate and connect that transcended the limitations she had once imposed on herself. The evening had shown her that courage and authenticity could create opportunities, that talent combined with heart could leave a lasting impression. The millionaire approached one final time before leaving, offering a gentle nod and a sincere compliment. He expressed admiration for her artistry and courage, leaving her with a sense of encouragement and possibility. She felt grateful, not just for the recognition, but for the validation that her music mattered, that her voice could reach beyond the walls of her small apartment. As she closed the piano lid, she allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The party had ended, the guests had gone, but the sense of accomplishment and confidence remained. She had entered the evening uncertain and anxious, unsure of her place, and she was leaving with a profound understanding of her own worth and the impact of her talent. The music had connected her to others, transformed her perception of herself, and opened doors she had never imagined. She left the mansion, stepping into the cool night air, feeling the city lights reflect off her face. The streets were quieter now, the bustle of the party replaced by the calm of reality. Yet she carried the warmth of the evening with her, the memory of eyes watching, of applause, of genuine admiration. She had shared herself and her music, and in return, she had received acknowledgement, respect, and the thrill of possibility. Walking home, she thought about the future, the opportunities hinted at, and the doors that could open if she embraced her talent fully. She felt a quiet determination, a resolve strengthened by the night's experiences. Her piano would continue to be her anchor, her guide, her voice, and now it would also be a key to new adventures, recognition, and growth. As she entered her apartment, the familiar sight of her piano welcomed her. She sat down briefly, letting her fingers dance over the keys once more, not for anyone else, but for herself. The melodies were soft, reflective, carrying the essence of the night and the realization that she was no longer alone in her passion. The music was hers, but it also belonged to anyone who had been moved by it, anyone who had witnessed the quiet power of her talent. The evening had changed her. She felt empowered, seen, and ready to step into a world that had once seemed beyond reach. Her music had left an impression that was real, human, and lasting. She knew that the journey ahead would have challenges, but she was prepared, strengthened by the courage she had shown and the validation she had received. The piano, her faithful companion, would guide her every step, carrying her toward a future filled with possibility, connection, and the joy of being fully recognized for who she truly was.